Welcome to CCN. I'm your host, Paul Medor. Today is July 24th, 2015. One Bitcoin is and shall remain worth one Bitcoin. But more on the exchange rates in a moment. Yesterday, CNBC News got down into the weeds a little and declared what many feared. Bitcoin's current and apparent developer conflict is threatening a hard fork, which will create a situation where nodes must choose which client to run. Detrimental as this will be, one can hope it's unlikely. It seems that mainstream financial press is taking advantage of internal strife in order to make grandiose statements about the future of Bitcoin. If you take issue with that, I encourage you to write to them directly. In a related effort, the Bitcoin.org team are currently working to revamp marketing materials so that new users are not surprised with what they find. This is to say that for a long time, free and instant transactions have been advertised, and that's just not how it works. Instant transactions are technically impossible, although the recipient can always accept a zero confirmation transaction. This is at heart of my interview with Josh Cincinatti from Blockcypher, which directly follows our Song of the Week. Now, without any further ado, let me pass it over to Vincent Kausen in Thailand for our market analysis.
Market Roundup on ccn.la. My name is Vincent Kausen and today is Friday, 24 July. In today's roundup, Bitcoin advance, China PMI, US unemployment claims and market turmoil cooking in the central bank kitchen. Now today Bitcoin leapt into an advance during the Asia Pacific session and by the start of Friday US trading, the 1 hour chart's 20 period moving average had crossed above the 200 period moving average. Price is now trading above the 20 period moving average and the 200 period moving average at every time frame except the monthly. But that's okay, because Bitcoin doesn't have enough chart history to even have a 200 period moving average at the 1 month time frame. With price now above these two critical moving averages, the 20 and the 200 period moving average at the 1 hour, the 4 hour and the 1 day time frames, Bitcoin is officially in advance. It's easy to talk about 360, 400, 550, 1000, 1200, 1680, but let's keep our eyes on 300 because this is a site level and we don't know what plans the larger players have for price right this minute. China. Manufacturing PMI is an index that reflects manufacturing growth as reported by a survey of purchasing managers. Index value for July was 48.2, so that is below 50. In other words, there is a contraction. The figure for June was 49.4, so July's 48.2 also happens to be a 15-month low, and it implies continued contraction of the Chinese manufacturing industry. This is at the base layer of Chinese industry, so it impacts jobs, it reflects decreased consumption, lower domestic and international demand, as well as lower eventual exports figures, and then down the line trade balance will be negative and its GDP affected. Now this is significant because China still holds the QE card that it has not yet played, even though Japan has turned the printing presses to maximum with steam and gears grinding. China has not played its QE card, and when it does, full-blown currency war and import-export imbalance in Asia. Yesterday, US unemployment claims figures were released, and the figure was 255,000 people claiming. Now that is down from the previous month and down from the month before. This figure, the unemployment claims, is a key metric being used by the Fed. The Fed is figuring that less unemployment claims implies more employment, greater productivity. It implies that the business cycle is in an upswing, and therefore the Fed can now raise rates after 7 years of almost 0% interest. Part and parcel of the Fed raising rates is every central bank feeling the pressure to raise rates in order to remain competitive, and the kickback is market volatility and potential liquidity crises. Now this is a word you're going to hear more and more, liquidity crisis, and we'll be exploring that in analysis in the coming weeks. On today, Friday, we've got a Bitcoin price advance. We have the prospect of the US Federal Reserve raising rates, all of the central banks around the world following suit. We've got the prospect of market turmoil and liquidity crunches in markets around the world, and all of this is going to cause money to move into safe havens like precious metals and like Bitcoin. This was Vincent Calsan with the weekly market roundup, and now back to the regular broadcast.
What you say you got? I don't believe you.
Not safe for work alert. If you're at work, turn down your volume or put on headphones. If you've got kids around, do the same. Or just skip ahead about 10 to 15 seconds and you won't have to hear any cuss words. Thanks. Now, the classy motherfuckers from the Coachella Valley were classy enough to donate a song for this week's episode called Serviceman. Links to their various social media profiles are available in the show notes. Check them out on YouTube. Thanks to Nathan Tackett for tipping us off. Remember, if you're an artist or you would like to help your friends who are artists or anything like that, I'm happy to share the listenership with you just like I am about to with the classy motherfuckers. Now, please enjoy Serviceman by the classy motherfuckers from the Coachella Valley.
Stumble across the ground again.
For what it's worth, the following interview was conducted in the wake of a 2.6 Bitcoin double spend attack against Shapeshift.io with Josh Cincinatti from Blockcypher. The bottom line is that if you accept a zero confirmation transaction, you run the risk of it being double spent. However, Blockcypher believes and have built a business around the idea that if done properly with enough information, then risk can be mitigated to the point that business can be conducted reasonably. Coming to you not live from San Francisco, I have Josh Cincinatti, the developer advocate for Blockcypher. Blockcypher is a... What are you guys, Josh? I mean, it's hard for me to, to describe it.
Sure. So, if you had to take our tagline, which I think is actually relatively descriptive for folks in web services, we're basically like an AWS for blockchain. So AWS is Amazon Web Services.
Right.
And sorry, go ahead.
No, that makes sense to me. That's
yeah.
So
yeah, and it's basically, we provide infrastructure services for folks that are looking to query and interact with blockchains. Predominantly Bitcoin is obviously the biggest blockchain, but we support Litecoin and Dogecoin, as well as Bitcoin testnet and our own internal testnet too. So yeah, that's I guess us in a nutshell.
So you're not necessarily a blockchain or a Bitcoin company as much as you are you're really working on the ledger side of things.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, in one hand, there's sort of two sides to the coin here. If you looked at number of users that we have and how many of them are using us for Bitcoin, that is the predominant use case. I can't say exact numbers, but it is the overwhelming majority. That said, there are plenty of folks, for example, like Shapeshift, which does cryptocurrency exchange, and they use us on the Litecoin and Dogecoin side. And part of the way that we've built our infrastructure is to be pretty agnostic. As long as it's a fork of Bitcoin, we can pretty much handle whatever the blockchain might be. And so consequently, we're also, if something ends up superseding Bitcoin but is in the same ilk, we're well prepared to kind of provide services for that as well. I'm a big Bitcoin believer myself, personally, not company policy, and so I hope something doesn't supersede Bitcoin, but, if it does, we'll be ready to roll with the punches.
I think that was good damage control there. Personally, I'm completely agnostic. I say may the best tech win in all cases.
Sure.
But anyway, so let's tell us about Josh Cincinatti. What's your background? I noticed that you have a novel out there.
Yeah. So I've done a lot, and that's sort of why a lot of different things, I should say. It's I've got a bit of a diverse background, which probably explains how I found myself as a developer advocate. To make a long story somewhat shorter, I grew up in Northern Virginia, and I went to undergrad at UVA, majored in politics and math. So it kind of makes sense that I wound up in Bitcoin, having also been a geek growing up. And then I wound up going right from undergrad into the business school, and got my MBA from Stanford around 2009, which, pro tip, if you ever plan on going to business school, don't find a time machine and decide to graduate in 2009. It's a bad idea. But,
right, in business or finance, I would assume.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, great year for novel concepts in decentralized consensus algorithms, but not so good for the budding MBA trying to find a job. But yeah, exactly. Luckily, I wound up. I did end up getting a job back in Washington D.C. around where I grew up. I worked for the Washington Post for a couple of years. I started off doing business development, then went into product management, and then after that, I went to Texas and did an Android application startup. And all the while, it's funny, but I had been more on the business side, but I've gotten, more and more technical as time went on. And I had taken a fair number of computer science classes in high school and college, but I didn't really spend that much time focusing on it back then. But as I got further in my career, I started realizing that I wanted to be more technical while still have the opportunity to sort of interact with developers and present to people and do a little bit of light sales and light business development. And that's how I kind of found myself attracted to the idea of developer advocacy. And for me, I unfortunately did not get interested in Bitcoin in 2009. I wish I had, but I ended up becoming sort of fascinated by it around 2012 and started building a number of side projects on it. And then from there, it just sort of captured my imagination and attention. And even while I was working on my startup, I become progressively more obsessed with
Bitcoin.
What Bitcoin could do. Yeah. And so I left my startup. Unfortunately, I left it in 2014. I had a little bit of a medical issue that I needed to get resolved, but it gave me a lot of time to think and think about what I wanted to do. And I basically just searched for the right spot at the right Bitcoin company, and I was very, very, very lucky to end up at Blockcypher as their second employee. And so I've been here for 2 months now.
So did Blockcypher have a listing for a developer advocate, or did you say these are the skills I have, this is what I can do?
Yeah, so they did end up having a listing for a developer advocate, and I had talked to Catherine long before she had interviewed me for the role. Catherine is our CEO and co-founder. She actually had been. It was known on their roadmap, for them that they were looking for a developer advocate immediately after they had raised their seed round, which they did in February, and that's sort of when we reconnected. And when I started the interview process with them. But I had, actually targeted my search. So I had kind of come to the developer advocacy epiphany, personally, maybe late last year, like around September, and I just looked at Bitcoin companies and blockchain companies, for pretty much, the next couple of months, and was just looking at developer advocacy. As the role that I wanted.
So tell us a little more about what your job involves.
Yeah.
So I'm a developer and I've got a gripe. Is that you're the guy I talk to, or?
Yeah, and being a developer advocate at a later stage, larger company is probably different than being, employee number 2 at a much smaller shop. But there's a little bit of everything. So you're technical, but you're not too technical. So, for example, I'm not putting any of my code in production, but I make demo applications. I showcase various different ways that you can interact with our API. I've, ended up writing a bunch of pieces of our SDKs, our client-side libraries. So it is a certain degree of you need a certain degree of technical aptitude. And then there's a mixture of other things that you see entire departments of in larger companies. So if I had to divide it out, it'd probably be 40% technical, 20% customer service, 20% marketing, and sort of 20% sales biz dev. And it's this weird amalgamation of all of them, but it's the kind of thing that works for a certain personality type, or someone who really loves interacting with engineers and helping them solve their problems. It's kind of a perfect job, because you basically get to see, all of these very cool ideas that people are working on, and if there happens to be a way where your company can provide better service and make it easier for them to build something, it's a real sort of mutually beneficial, arrangement that you can have with them, and you get to be the one sort of leading that charge. So yeah, I wrote our reference documentation. I'm going to be writing, if you've seen some of my blog posts, I do a lot of outward-facing, blog pieces for the company. I do a lot of presentations, go to a lot of meetups. I'm going to the SF Bitcoin meetup next week to do a presentation on the spam attack. I'm going to be going to the SF Devs after that. So yeah, it's a nice. I love it because I just like every single piece of the role is just interesting to me. And on top of that, as you saw from my novel, which was the weird comedy hobby that I have coming out, I love writing.
Let's talk about what happened at Shapeshift. I'm not a blockchain expert, but as I understand it, there was like a massive spam attack going on. Where we had numerous tiny transactions basically trying to clog up blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And so Shapeshift was suffering because their business model kind of relies on instant transactions, and they utilize Blockcypher for their confidence factor. Is that what it's?
That's the name of our product, that we provide to help people sort of mitigate risks associated with unconfirmed transactions.
I find that an interesting and necessary application. I guess Coinbase must have its own in-house version of that. Coinbase and BitPay. Is that what is? I don't know. I'm asking.
Yeah. Oh, sure. I'm not too familiar with their infrastructures. I'm a big fan of both of them as companies, and anyone who's accepting unconfirmed transactions, it would definitely make sense to have some kind of risk analysis in place. If I were them, I would certainly have something like that. Although, the way to look at it, and to consider sort of what happened at Shapeshift. So effectively, someone on the Bitcoin mailing list, they put their black hat on, and they basically admitted to stealing money by successfully engaging in a double spend against both Shapeshift and, although it wasn't, I don't know if it was confirmed or not, but against Coinbase as well. So in Shapeshift's case, they did in fact successfully take some amount. I think they admitted to 2.6 Bitcoin. And Shapeshift was in fact using our zero confidence or zero confirmation confidence factor. We actually, it used to be called the zero confirmation confidence factor, and I would always slip up and say zero conf, which is obviously the exact wrong thing you want to say.
Right.
But no, they were in fact using our confidence factor, and they were not, honestly, they were not really all that surprised to see a successful double spend because they were using our confidence factor the right way. It's meant to be a risk mitigation tool, and basically what happens when you use the confidence factor is, so for any unconfirmed transaction, you can pull our API, and then we'll give you a best guess percentage on how likely it is a double spend will succeed against that transaction, right? So if you pull our API and you see that an unconfirmed transaction that is just, maybe money that's being sent to you, you get that transaction hash, you pull the API, you look, and it says, there's a 50% chance that a double spend will be successful. At that point, you probably won't accept the transaction and won't give your customer or whoever's sending it. You wouldn't want to give them anything, right, or any money.
Not until they had the confirmations, right?
Well, either until the confirmations, or in our case, so we normally, under most network conditions, you can get up to 99% on our confidence factor within 8 to 10 seconds. And effectively, what that means is, based off of our model, there's a 1% chance that not only will a double spend be attempted, but that it will also succeed. So effectively, like, Shapeshift was using all of our, they were using the confidence factor, and for many more than 99 cases out of 100, and I can't speak to it exactly, but for many more than 99 cases out of 100, they were using that confidence factor, and they weren't being, double spent against, right? This one black hat managed to double spend effectively once against the confidence factor, and that was well within sort of the broad amount of it was well within sort of acceptable losses for Shapeshift, because they've had many other transactions that have reached 99% in the confidence factor that have gone through fine. And it's kind of like it's similar in a way to providing like credit card fraud insurance, where you're what you're really doing is looking.
It's going to happen. It's just a matter of how much, right?
Right. And that's a question of like, so what is your tolerance for risk, and what are you willing to what are you willing to sort of lose? And if you want to take a big gamble, you could take like 100 Bitcoin transaction and like wait until 70% confidence. But obviously, most people wouldn't do that. They'd wait a few confirmations for something like that. But ultimately, like it's up to whatever your risk appetite might be. And what I find really cool is that all these people have basically said, oh well, all these use cases are impossible in Bitcoin because we can't do instantaneous unconfirmed transactions reliably, and that's just not that's not true.
Do you get the feeling that they're curmudgeon-y about it?
I can't I can't really like fully speculate on their motives or their intent, because you only see what they say, and I think a lot of them have reasonable arguments to make about the effectiveness of certain other solutions that might come into play, like Lightning Network and payment channels are all relevant and useful technologies to bring to bear, but a lot of them aren't really quite ready yet, and many of them still rely on a certain amount of unconfirmed transactions for at least not Lightning Network, but payment channels do rely on a certain amount of unconfirmed transactions initially to initiate the channel. So there's I don't know. I mean, I can understand everyone has sort of the benefit and the curse of a big open source project. Everyone has their own ideas and visions about how things should be done properly, and I think in our case we've demonstrated that even in the current environment where there's supposedly all this uncertainty around unconfirmed transactions, it's very possible to accept them and mitigate risk effectively. And we have dozens of customers who do so and provide services that otherwise wouldn't really be possible. And a lot of that involves merchant processing. Bitnet just announced their sort of instant merchant approval, and that's utilizing our confidence factor as well. So there are lots of people that are out there that are taking advantage of what we have to offer in terms of creating near instantaneous Bitcoin payments within the existing infrastructure. And if you go to Blockcypher.com and then press the little live button on the top, you can see a stream of it's our live block explorer, and you can go in and look at the unconfirmed transactions streaming into the Bitcoin network. You can click on any one of them, and there's a little bubble that says confidence there, and you can see it bubble up as it goes on. Because I think most people aren't trying to malevolently steal other people's Bitcoin, or double spend other people's Bitcoin, or double spend their own Bitcoin to themselves, right?
Right.
And if you have a good idea of sort of the network topology and what likely double spends look like what the shape of those transactions, how they're formatted, etc. If you know what they look like, then you can have a great deal of confidence about accepting unconfirmed, and that's what we sort of provide on a quantitative.
The reason I asked that was kind of, I do feel, could contrast this to other open source projects. You could contrast it to, say, Linux.
Sure.
Say that Linus Torvalds took a job at Fedora, or Red Hat. My mistake. Say he took the job there, and he started making changes to the kernel that made it difficult for other distros, or made it extra steps. Then we might see it diverging and have two separate but equal kernels. And Linus has obviously never done something like that. And eventually there was created the Linux Foundation and so on. But the bottom line is, you do have to take people's motives into account when they bring up these issues and the way they discuss them. You have to take their personal interests into account. And if they have a dog in the hunt, such as if they work for another company that is going to approach this differently, then that's suspect. So anyhow, I like the way that you address that. That's a very cordial way of addressing sort of sometimes, because this black hat you speak of, I mean, do we know who he is? I guess this is an angle of the story I hadn't really picked up on prior.
No, I mean, I think it's some pseudonym, and it's unclear. It doesn't sound like they even returned the money, which it's funny that they were trying to provide a public service and demonstrate that, the network's broken. But you see, most people who are in the sort of gray hat range would at least return the money afterwards. I could be wrong on that, and maybe there's an update and they did end up returning it, But yeah, it's unclear, and the other interesting, open question is it's unclear who was behind the massive spam attack last week,
which preceded it. Do you think that massive spam going on contributed to the ability, that's why the confidence factor was wrong that time? Is that a possibility?
I'm going to put my speculation hat on. I don't think actually the spam attack affected anything about our confidence factor. If anything, because initially people were sending transactions with low fees relative to the fee average that had gone up significantly in the midst of the spam attack. If anything, our confidence factor did wind up taking all that into account, and it actually got slower. Just very, very, in a very tiny amount, but it was slightly slower because we didn't have as much confidence about transactions, about the possibility of double spend when there's so much activity going on. So I think that our confidence factor was still quite accurate there. If anything, it was almost too conservative. But the particular vector by which this guy managed to double spend.
I don't want you to get hung on those words you just said. I want to clarify. You mean that based on what the confidence factor knew about the transaction, it was still dead on. Like there was just a variable that it didn't account for.
Yeah, there was a particular method by which this guy succeeded that we hadn't accounted for before. And basically, once we figured out what this guy was doing, we updated our confidence factor, and it's no longer possible. At least, it's still possible to double spend against it effectively, but we're going to take that into account for our confidence factor, and it would never reach the level that it reached earlier. Sure. And that's sort of the beauty of the way that how rapidly we update our confidence factor, because this guy, there actually have been a number of successful double spends in the Bitcoin network, and this guy was just very public about announcing it. But we've seen those other successful double spends before, and all of them have been incorporated into our model. And even an unsuccessful double spend attempts have been incorporated into our model.
Okay.
So effectively, sorry, go for it.
Sorry. We're at 25 minutes now. So, so effectively, let me, So, Shapeshift, with them, they have limits on how much you can do anyway. And
Sure.
the other thing to mention, as far as if you want to illustrate, like if this was like I guess I consider it almost like a terrorist attack meant to wake us up or something like that. Look at it this way: Shapeshift lost their own money. They didn't lose my money. I didn't have money sitting on their exchange that this guy went and stole. So
Right.
what he effectively did was much more like a liquor store robbery than it was like a bank robbery.
Yeah, very much so. And they, Shapeshift went into using our confidence factor with knowledge that it was a risk mitigation tool, and they knew that some number of those transactions could be successfully double spent against. What matters is that the total volume is less than what our confidence factor says it will be, which it was and still has been, which is why they're still using us, right? And why many others have a great deal of confidence in it as well. And it's almost, to take that analogy a step further, it's almost like a liquor store was robbed. Because maybe there was one corner of the store that didn't have a camera on it,
Right.
And now we saw it happen, and we know that part of the store needs to be watched, and so we've added that camera. And so that's, if someone tries to pull off the same stunt, they're not going to be able to. And we've been, I think that as a company, we've been pretty clear that, zero confirmation, confirmation transactions are eminently manageable as long as you view it as a risk mitigation strategy. You don't want to be accepting like 1,000 Bitcoin for a house and not wait at least 10 confirmations or something, right? But if you're trying to engage in less than a certain number of Bitcoin and you have reserves on hand and you can accept a certain number of losses, in some ways it's like the most efficient
way to
fraud insurance imaginable. And it's and we do it without really, we don't know anything about who's transacting what. Like we don't care. It's very much like it's very much an aggregate data that's completely sort of anonymous as to intent. We don't care about any of that. We're just looking at how transactions propagate and what their actual shape is. What they number of inputs and outputs, how many of them there are, where they're going. But none of that is based off of like knowing anything about like the nature or intent of those transactions. So it's way better than having a sort of like credit score because there's nothing really personally identifiable about any of it,
Right. I appreciate it. It's really it's in math we trust. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And what's cool is anyone can, if they want to try and successfully double spend, and they want to, judge, independently verify our confidence factor. It's all API calls are all open, so they can go in and call the API and see what the confidence factor is on a transaction that they're attempting to double spend, and see if they can go through with it. Like it's not as if we're keeping our doors closed about it. So by all means, like try it, and we'll. I'm pretty sure that our dozens of customers that still use us are still going to remain our customers after their attempts. So we do have a fair amount of confidence about it, and I think our customers they do too.
So what sets you apart from the competition at Blockcypher? You're employee number 2, so I guess you're a good person to ask.
Yeah. So I would say so. Part of it is the first thing I'd say is like we don't really like viewing competition as competition or what people would call competition as our competition. I think that lots of different infrastructure companies satisfy different needs for different people, and depending on what you want or need, we all have our advantages. In our case, I would say that our confidence factor is one of the biggest differentiators. We also have on-chain microtransactions. Our SLA is way better than anyone's in the field, and then on top of that, I think our webhooks and WebSockets are, and we've gotten this feedback from lots of people, bar none the most reliable out of any notification service. And the other nice thing for folks that are, I view this as an advantage, depending on how you're doing your development, you might view it as an advantage too. Many of our API calls are very, very similar to the RPC returns that you get from Bitcoin Core.
Itself?
Yeah, so effectively, like you could run your own node, and then it's almost like a drop-in replacement to use us. And it could go both ways, right? Like, let's say you don't want to use us anymore, and you want to try and run your own Bitcoin node and use the JSON RPC interface. You're more than welcome to. I think that part of why we did that is that, again, we're confident about how much easier we make Bitcoin development for most people, and so they'll wind up using us even though they have the opportunity to immediately switch over, because we don't want people to feel locked in. We want them to be able to switch and choose whatever meets their needs. But in our case, we're pretty confident that we'll fit that bill.
I think you guys are doing great. And,
thanks, Paul. Thanks.
I do. I think that zero confirmation is necessary if we're going to use Bitcoin as a currency. Or I think that just like any other currency, it requires a lot of faith in the person receiving it. And,
Sure.
I wanted to mention earlier when you were talking about, say, buying a house, that made me think, well, if I sell a car out here and a guy gives me $2,000 in cash and I don't mark any of the bills, for all I know, every bit of it could be counterfeit. But I'm still more likely to accept that cash from him based on, dealing, it's just part of business. It's the cost of doing business. So, I think that
That's absolutely.
I think that gets lost a lot in the narrative. Is people get so caught on this one thing, like there must be 6 confirmations.
Right. And it's a question of almost perfectionism versus pragmatism.
Exactly.
And when we first, when I first released my article about zero confirmation confidence factor, it actually Gavin Andreessen ended up quoting it in a tweet, which might be my I've got that off the bucket list now.
You've really lived, yeah.
Yeah, I made it. It was real, but he was great, and he said one of the best pieces of advice I think for anyone building a business anywhere, which is don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? And he said he loved seeing this kind of work happening because we weren't letting this sort of pursuit of the perfect cryptocurrency implementation stop us from implementing a feature that could bring Bitcoin into the mainstay today. And when you look at all these successful companies and startups, they didn't wait until they had the perfect execution. They waited until they had something demonstrably better, and it might be rough on the edges, but if you can make it work pragmatically, you'd still make it work. And that's been I think it's the right sentiment to go forward as far as Bitcoin development is concerned. And I'm glad to see those sorts of those voices there, because we all, I think anyone who's developed before gets caught up on creating the perfect architecture or the perfect product from time to time, but you'll notice as I think developers gain more experience, they get much more in line of okay, let's draw a balance here and let's build what we can build and make something that can work today, even if it's not in this sort of
or even
idealistic.
If it just winds up being a rough draft and you go back to it and just build based on what you learned. Yes, I totally can relate to that.
Yeah.
So I think we're about out of time, Josh. But
okay.
I do want to ask you to go ahead and tell our listeners where they can find you personally, and as well as Blockcypher. It's been great talking to you.
Great, likewise, Paul. Thanks so much for inviting me and interviewing me. This is a lot of fun. So if anyone out there is interested in doing any sort of blockchain development, just head over to Blockcypher, BLOCKCYPHER.com. And then you can read everything you could possibly want to read about our API and how to get started. Additionally, for me personally, thankfully, I'm probably the only Josh Cincinatti in existence, somewhat miraculously. So if you search Josh Cincinatti, I think a bunch of my social network profiles come up, and it's very easy to find me. I'm for all you decentralized identity fans, I'm CIN on one name, so that might be another way to.
Are you on Minds yet? Are you on Minds.com?
No.
That is a cool project. They're not paying me to say this. Everyone, the future of social networking is Minds.com, and they do integrate Bitcoin. I think they're even incubated in the New York Bitcoin Center, but that's beside the point. So.
How do you spell it?
MINDS.
Minds.com.
Yeah, it's incredibly cool. It's an alpha, but Josh, thank you for coming on today, and enjoy the weather in San Francisco. You're incredibly lucky to live in that beautiful city.
I know. I keep pinching myself every day I wake up here. I'm hoping that it'll be a long time yet for me here, and for Bitcoin too as a technology. So. But thanks so much for having me, and really appreciate the interview, and thanks, Paul.
This concludes the 14th episode of CCN. coming to you every Friday from the childhood home of Bill Clinton. I hope that I've been engaging you over these past several episodes, and I do appreciate any feedback, suggestions, or requests. More about me at phm.link, and always the latest cryptocurrency news at ccn.la. The word of the week is community. What does community mean to you? What is the Bitcoin community to you? If you'd like me to read your response on air, please email it to paul.madore@cryptocoinsnews.com or kite me a telegram at phmadore. Have a great weekend and see you next week. Maybe during the week, sometime you'll check out our sister site, hacked.com.